Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting and informative episode of Digital Data Podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Maundu, a broadcast journalist and a digital security trainer. I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism, and I'm also an African Union Media Fellow. So today we are continuing with our Digital ID series, and today we are looking at Kenya. Kenya, my motherland. Kenya, my home. So I'm very, very excited, and in this episode, we are looking at digital IDs from the perspective of inclusivity. Welcome to the show. Kenya has become a pioneer in digital identity system with innovation that promise to make access to services more efficient and secure. But how do we ensure this advancement don't leave anyone behind? What challenges remain, especially for vulnerable population, and how can we build a digital identity system that truly embraces inclusivity for all Kenyans? So stick around to learn more on digital IDs in Kenya. This podcast episode has been made possible by the African Union Media Fellowship Program, which is implemented by the African Union through the Information Communication Directorate, supported by GIZ on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. So, welcome to the show.
My name is Mustafa Mahmoud. I work for an organization called Namati. I work for the citizenship program, and our work is basically championing inclusion when it comes to nationality documents. And in regards to the new transition to digital ID in the region and in the world, we have always been campaigning on having inclusive digital IDs that address systemic injustices that existed before, but at the same time with safeguards like data protection, rights to privacy, and all those things. So I have a few years experience of working in the field of ID. Yeah, that's all.
So thank you so much for making the time. And I'm just going to go straight to the question. The first question I'm going to ask you is just describe to our audience what is a digital ID.
Digital ID can be as simple as the username that you have on Facebook. It could be the WhatsApp number because they're digitally identifiable detail. It could be a social media profile, or it could be as complex as a national document that identify you that can be read by a machine that is supported by a database that has a digital existence. For example, if you look at the Kenyan context, we've had several IDs. We've had the first generation ID, which was handwritten. We've had two sets of second generation IDs. One was the one that was laminated, and then the second one was the plastic one. Then we've had two regimes of digital IDs. We've had Huduma Namba, which was flopped, and then now we are moving to another one called Maisha Namba. These are all forms of IDs that are machine readable, that can be verified in terms of know your customer or KYC online. And also they come with chips so that they could be read by a machine. In simple terms and broadly, it could be as simple as a social media profile, and it could be as complex as a national identity document that is recognized by a state.
Okay. So another question regarding the work that you do. So what are your thoughts on the introduction of Maisha Namba and its potential impact on the rights of citizens, especially the marginalized community that you work with?
You see, our work is not to oppose digital ID. Our work is to give advice to the government on what has failed in the last ID regime. And one of the failures of the last ID regime, it was an exclusive club that only a few could access. Over 5 million people have to prove with a burdensome burden of proving who they are, and it could take between 1 to even 10 or 20 years to get that document. So our role has always been to tell the government, you have been leaving people behind. How do you move to digital when you need that manual ID so that you could be included? Well, you need a birth certificate that we still have 60% penetration for you to be included. Our queries have always been asking the government, what ways are the data protected? Issues of public participation, because these are very big shift. The last time we had an ID regime change was around the 1990s. But if you look at even the law that is anchoring the Maisha Namba is the 1947 Cap 107 Registration of Persons Act, which is, in our view, a law that is a colonial law, and the intention of the ID at that time was colonialism. So we need a law that has the intention of inclusion, has the intention of identifying people that they're sovereign. So that's where we are coming from. We are building a new system that will affect us for generation to come, but it has not been properly anchored by a law that it has the spirit of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So we are having it anchored on a law that is very colonial in nature because it was developed during the colonial period. And it does not even have enough safeguards of making sure that people's data are included. If you look at issues of opting in, issues of data sharing, there is no point that a citizen has the right to give consent for the data to be shared. Ours has always been to give the government advice based on the feedback that we have seen from the communities, because we've been working with communities for over 12 years, and we have noted where the gaps are, and we have developed a lot of policy documents. We've tried to sit down with government and shared some of the data that we have. That's the entry point for us.
So you talk about the issue of data protection. What safeguard then should be in place to ensure the protection of personal data under that system?
You see, one of the things about Maisha Namba is that it has several layers. It's an ecosystem as a whole. It begins with Maisha Namba at birth, that is birth registration. Then it comes to Maisha card for minors, which is part of the plan. It's supposed to come around 12 years or something. Then it comes to Maisha card at 18. After you get the Maisha card, you have access to eCitizen, and you'll get something else that is called an EID on the system. That's also part of the Maisha ecosystem. Then when you die, the death certificate is transformed into a death Maisha number. So it's a whole ecosystem that we need to look at. All these safeguards that are there. First, were there any human rights impact assessment in terms of when this data is lost, what are the damages? Are there aspects of exclusion? How have we handled issues of inclusion? Like, what are the impacts into the human rights of the citizens who are going to be the data subjects? Have there been data protection impact assessment? And if so, have they been published so that people could criticize them and give them meaningful feedback? Unfortunately, there's only been one on the birth side. For the ID and all those have not been done. And then at the age of 18, all these systems are supposed to be integrated. Are we going to have a centralized digital record? And what are the failures of a centralized digital record system or register system? So these are the biggest concerns that we've had. And it's the same concerns that civil society have had for the Huduma number time. We have always been asking the government, when you're rolling out this project, have you had enough public participation? And for years, government has always been giving us flimsy excuses that they've had 500 public participation exercises, which to us, we have been monitoring all of them, which in the essence, they've only been chief barazas canvassed into public participation. But the best part that happened is that the government has proved to us that they can actually do meaningful public participation during the ouster of the deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua. So we've always asked them, because this is something that is going to affect us for generation, we need meaningful public participation that is not just a rubber stamping exercise. So yeah, the aspect of public participation, the aspect of the nature of the database, aspects of issues of exclusion that has existed for generation to be addressed before we move into a whole system that is going to leave out other people. And then the other thing that comes with Maisha Namba is the cost aspect. As you may know, the ID fee has been increased because of Maisha card, because the government says it's expensive to print it, because ICAO is basically the International Civil Aviation Organization standard, so that we could use it within the border points. But ask yourself, how many people in the country travel across the border that they have to be subjected into something that is not a need? We need to do a needs assessment before we roll out a project that is going to affect over 50 million people, of which only maybe 10% of the population travels. People have to choose between food and a document that is essential to them, but they don't need the part of travel. I think the government, if it had done public participation, maybe people would have told them, we don't need to use an ID to travel when we can get a temporary passport, when we can get an East African passport. We've always had these documents. And even before the Maisha Namba, we've been using an ID at the border points, and it has worked. So why do we need to have a chip to enable us to travel? And then it expires after every 10 years. All these things are going to bring cost. If you see, the renewal is 1,000 now, and there's also another amendment to the registration of person regulation that wants to push it to 2,000 shillings. How many people can afford it? So these are the things that we have been trying to say. Effective and meaningful public participation will have addressed all these things.
So allow me to circle back to your point on the issue of Maisha Namba being a layered ecosystem. I feel like the government has not really educated people on this issue. So my question is, what would be the implication of data breaches in such cases?
You see, the thing is, there's a lot of information that Kenyans need to know. There's a reason as to why we are moving to e-citizen, all the services, is that Maisha Namba is a whole ecosystem that in our field we call digital public infrastructure. It begins with a digital ID, then it comes into integration of payment modules and integrations of registers that are interoperable. Now, the impact of a data breach compared to now, like right now, if your ID is stolen, you still have the identity of being called Cecilia. But if your Maisha card is stolen, that identity is gone. For example, I was in Nakuru 2 months ago, and one of the families was telling me a case where there's a woman who wanted to give birth, and she was rushed to the hospital. And the way the IDs, you pick an ID on the streets and you can use it when you need it. So the woman, they had refused to admit her because of an ID. Someone went outside there and picked a random ID and used it to admit her. Unfortunately, she died during the childbirth. So when she died, that ID is supposed to be used to register a death. Remember, this person, for example, was called Mustafa, and then she came with an ID of Mahmoud. So in the record, Mahmoud has died, but Mustafa is not unknown. So if I am the owner of that ID, I go and renew that ID, that system, because the hospital files returns in these systems, if they file a return that Mr. So-and-so had died, it means my identity is done. A simple data breach of someone using someone's ID because of running around systems can lead to someone being struck off an ID. That's a simple example, but look at it in this angle, that today, because of inheritance wrangles, someone goes and writes a death certificate. We have had several cases of fraud where people register people as dead so that they could inherit them. So you find these cases have been common, but now when systems have been generated to be integrated, when one record is struck, this person is unknown. Just like, for example, you remember before 2021, when Uhuru Kenyatta's account on Twitter was apparently hacked and he lost access to the account. Now you imagine losing access to your Maisha number. It means all the assets that you had are gone. All the records, if you had any, are gone. You are non-existent. So how do you recover that damage? If it was just an ID that is lost, the way watu wananyongwa wananyanganywa wallets, you will go and replace the ID. But imagine if this ID is lost and someone uses it for fraud or something like that, that record will haunt you for the rest of your life because they are linked. So there is a lot of risk in terms of integrating systems, but we need to look at what are the redress mechanisms, what are the data safeguards that are there. Unfortunately, having a data protection commission is not the only solution to everything. We need to have those safeguards within the Registration of Persons Act. Who is in charge of the safeguard? It is not mentioned. Who is in charge of breaches? It is not mentioned. Who is in charge of being held liable? Most of the times you'll find that they are putting the liability on an individual. But you forget that even the registrar has been implicated for years for issuing wrong documents, for doing a lot of things. So a data breach at the moment is more lethal under Maisha card compared to the current regimes that we have.
So, Mustafa, by listening to you, I feel like there are so many loopholes in this issue, yet it's an agenda that is really being pushed. And also, I remember when it came to Huduma Namba, I produced a documentary on Huduma Namba. And when I was conducting the interview, let me say 3/4 of the people I interviewed didn't even know what Huduma Namba is, but they had registered. So also my question is, as the population, do we question, or we just follow what the government says, like register for Maisha Namba? People don't ask questions. They don't know what is Maisha Namba, but they still register. So what should people do so that they can also, the implication that they're putting themselves through this thing called Maisha Namba is not as simple as they think?
I think for those people who already have IDs, it's very simple for them. You can advise them to keep the IDs and not renew them until this system has been fixed. But for those people who are turning 18, they don't have an option, because what the government did, it tricked people. And any person who's applying for an ID, they're not telling them that they're being enrolled into Maisha card system. So all IDs that are being issued from the beginning of the year, all of them are Maisha cards. Unfortunately, that's the case. For those people who are already having the old IDs, they can only get enrolled the moment that they are renewing that ID. So they're the only ones who have the right to opt out at the moment until the time that the system is fixed. For those people who are turning 18 or have turned 18 this year, unfortunately, there is no safeguard for them. The only thing that we can ask Kenyans is to hold the government accountable in terms of joining campaigns like like My ID, My Right campaign, to ask the government, what are the safeguards that are there? To ask the government who held out a pilot program of the Maisha Namba system, and you only had a 40% success rate, and it was in Nairobi. What about Turkana? What about Isiolo? What about Nanyuki and other places that are a bit remote compared to Nairobi? And one of the reasons as to why we only had a 40% success rate was the digital divide. You'll find that everything is moving digital, but the people who are serving you are not even tech savvy. So there are still loopholes in terms of rushing a system. This is a system that is going to hunt us for years. We needed proper rollout. But when you're rolling out a system and you've given people 6 months to roll out a system, you've not thought about the policy, you've not thought about the procedures, you've not thought about the equipments needed. I think it was a rushed decision, and citizens have to hold the government accountable in terms of asking them to take a step back and revisit this whole system and make it as inclusive as possible, and to have safeguards in terms of data protection and other safeguards in terms of the consent of citizens giving data. Because one of the things that Maisha system is going to do is to give access to this database. Remember, it's going to be a consolidated database. So aspects of even the NTSA data, the aspects of your fingerprint register that has criminal records and all those things will be integrated. So you don't know which data is being shared because there is no law that says what can be shared and what cannot be shared. So those are the things that we have a lot of concerns over. And I'm sorry if the information is depressing, because that's the state of the affair in the country.
Unfortunately, it is depressing. You know, you talked about this lady, unfortunately, who died, the pregnant lady. I remembered Kictanet, Kenya ICT Action Network, was collecting information about Huduma Number. And one of the things, they met a lady, and the lady said when she was registering, she was asked to write her husband's name, and she said she doesn't have a husband. And the person who was registering has told her, you just write any name. You know, it feels like the same issues, just the name is different. It's Huduma Number, but now it has been sanitized to Maisha Namba. So a follow-up question on that. When it comes to the issue of data breaches, and it's good you talked about the Office of the Data Protection. So what steps should be taken to ensure that there are no data breaches when it comes to the issue of digital ID system, not only the Kenyan digital ID system, but around the world, and how should they be addressed?
You see, we need to learn from the failures of governments, not only successes of governments. When you look at other that is being praised a lot, you'll find that they've had several attempts of data breaches, and unfortunately they had the same excuses like Kenya, that even 100 men cannot breach the data. But they've been breaches. Unfortunately for us, we don't have safeguards. You've had one of the judges of the Supreme Court saying that during the court process of the ouster of the former deputy president, the judicial system was down. And they had built for years a firewall that was breached, that even the judiciary could not access their system. So you imagine such a breach of the judiciary has happened. We have not learned from it. We've had times that even a citizen was apparently hacked for some time, but we didn't learn from it. So the safeguards, even asking yourself that the Data Protection Commission is asking people to register as data processors. Have these government agencies registered as data processors? Who's going to enforce them breaching this data? Because first and foremost, you remember the time of Huduma Number, there were cases of Huduma cards being taken to Shago, where the people say chiefs had asked the registrar that this person had gone missing. Kindly send the ID to see if they are alive. Several cases like that were highlighted by media, and it shows a data breach that people think it's an innocent data breach, but it's significant. You don't know why someone ran away from home, but you have decided to show that that person is alive. Maybe people wanted to kill that person and they had gone to a safe place. So like those violations that people will brush away might have bigger impacts, because these devices will sit in the houses of chiefs, in the houses of registrars. But what are the safeguards that are there that could be put in place in terms of laws? If you look at in Europe, there were cases where the ID registers were leaked, and footballers like Messi were victims when their informations of where they live were put in dark web. So what are the safeguards that we have? At the moment, we don't have any. The only thing that we are told is that we have a data protection commission. It's like telling people, what is safeguard against crime? We have light. So unfortunately, we need to think proactively on how do we protect our people.
Thank you for that. So circling back on the issue of citizen being enlightened on this issue. So how can citizens be educated on their rights regarding digital IDs and the use of their data? Because I feel they don't know. Nothing.
Unfortunately, it is the responsibility of the government to do civic education, and they have failed at it. The only time we usually do civic education is during the election period, but after that, they fail. The government needs to do the same awareness that they're doing for enrolling people to shisha and all those things that are really failing. In terms of telling people what are the impacts of having a digital ID, what do you need to know in terms of safeguarding that card. It's the same way. This Maisha number is going to be like the social security number in the US. When someone has your number, if you put it carelessly, they can easily steal that ID. You see the way the US citizens hide their social security number? That's how people should be empowered to know that this Maisha number is a life-determining number. But do they know? You know the way people are very trusting. They go to a shop and wanamwambia mtoto nilifanyia transaction, this is my PIN number. Now, this is a number that has all your assets. It has everything. You go to a bank, they see this number. You go everywhere, they know this number. When that number is lost, when that card is lost, how do you recover it? People need to be empowered on what are the implications of going digital. It's like telling people you are walking naked. How do you need to dress and cover yourself? I think there is an importance of doing civic awareness in terms of what are the dangers of going digital and what are the safeguards that people need to do, so that we already know that tumeyavulia, we need to just shower with the water.
Aya, maji ukiamua.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we are okay. So as we come to the tail end of this conversation, what actions can human rights organizations take to ensure that Maisha Namba promotes rather than hinders human rights?
I think one of the failures of us civil society, we have fragmented ourselves. I only deal on health rights, I only deal on education rights, but we need to come to the realization that identity is the right to have rights. It's the right to have freedom of movement. It's the right to be protected against torture. It is the right to have economic rights and all those things. It's about time that human rights organizations realize that whatever field you're working in, identity rights is your responsibility to speak about it, because it is affecting every kind of population that you're working with. Even if those people who live with disability, people who living with HIV/AIDS, people who are the elderly, like every person living in this country is literally affected with this transition. So we need to remove our heads from that sand that we've buried it for some time and come together and speak about this issue and hold the government accountable. And even if it means even the civil society to begin a campaign of educating people on how to safeguard their rights in terms of the digital ID rights, it's about time. The same way we held hands together during the 2010 referendum to educate people about the Constitution. We realized that the government had failed in terms of civic education. We came together to educate the people. It's the same time that it's a call for action that we are calling civil society to hold hands, to pull the limited resources we have to empower the people that this thing is happening. The most we can do is either campaign to make it better, but at the same time, when you're making it better, those people who are not joining the campaign to make it better should do awareness in terms of how do people protect themselves during the transition.
Okay, so how does a human rights focused digital system ID look like to you?
Digital ID system begins with an aspect that leaves no one behind. And one of the aspects of Goal 16 is legal identity for all. Every person, we should be Pan-Africanist. It is actually common sense that every person should be registered so that we know who you are. It's more dangerous for the government to have ghosts than to have people who are registered. That's the first step. So everybody to be given documentation, who deserves it. Secondly, every person to be given the right to know when their data is being shared. In countries, for example, like Estonia, where we have copy-pasted most of the things, and we've only copy-pasted things that looked beautiful, they give us tokens that expire. So if you're going to the bank does not only ask the government to access your data, they also give you a token so that you know your data is being accessed. But right now, you go to the bank, they ask you for your ID. They even ask you, did you renew your ID? Because they can see all the details on the system that this person renewed an ID, there's a new serial number and all those things. So as a person whose data is being accessed, you have the right to give consent at the point of access. Apart from that, you have the right to know which information is being shared, and also the aspect of what are the safeguards that the government has put in place to protect your data. So yeah, the protection, the consent, the inclusion, and also we should not centralize all the databases together. They could be interoperable, which means linked, but it's not a must for all of them to be together, because it's very common knowledge. We have been taught since primary, do not put all your eggs in one basket. But I think we are blind to the truth, and it's about about time we hold each other accountable and just do those simple safeguards that put the people's rights ahead. And to conclude, I don't think there's any person who's against digital. We are only against going blindly. We are only against government being truth blind. So if you're able to realize the solutions that the civil society is giving, we'll be able to go together in the same direction.
Thank you so much. I've actually learned so much through this conversation. And I think you've answered the very last question, which would have been the key recommendation for ensuring that the digital system ID or Maisha Namba aligns with Kenya's constitutional right and also international human rights standard. So, Mustafa, thank you so much for making the time. And I think one of the key takeaway that I've taken from this conversation is leaving no one behind, at the same time safeguarding people's data protection rights, rather. So thank you so much, Mustafa.
Welcome, so.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in today's episode of Digital Data Podcast. It's our hope that this conversation has sparked new insights into the evolving landscape of digital ID in Kenya and its potential for a more inclusive future. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. We would love to hear your thoughts on how digital ID can impact inclusivity in your community. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll catch you next time on Digital Data Podcast.